They came in smiling. That should have been my first warning. My 2 daughters stood at my front door on a Sunday afternoon in matching silk blouses. Not matching by accident, I realized later, with a man I'd never met carrying a leather briefcase. My older daughter said his name was Mr. Fowler. She said he was a financial planner. She said they'd set up an appointment. I said nobody told me about any appointment. She laughed and said, "Mom, we told you last week. You must have forgotten." I hadn't forgotten. But I let that go because I'd learned over the years that arguing about who said what leads nowhere good. I stepped aside and let them in. My name is Grace. I'm 68 years old. I taught third grade for 31 years at the same elementary school, 2 miles from the house I've lived in since 1987. My husband, Frank, built the back porch with his own hands. He died 11 years ago, a Tuesday in October, leaves still on the trees. We had 2 daughters. Audrey, the older one, married well, lives 40 minutes away, calls when she needs something. Iris, the younger, follows wherever Audrey leads, has since they were girls. I used to think that was loyalty. Now I know it's something else. I make coffee. That's what you do when people come to your house, even when something in your chest is already pulling tight. Mr. Fowler set his briefcase on the kitchen table. My kitchen table, the one Frank and I bought at an estate sale in 1991, and opened it with a click that felt too formal for a Sunday. "We've been worried about you," Audrey began. I said I was fine. "You're alone in this house," she said. "It's a lot to manage." I said I'd been managing it for 11 years. Iris looked at her hands. She always did that when Audrey was leading. Mr. Fowler slid a document across the table. Clean white paper, legal font, a highlighted line near the bottom with a small arrow sticker that said, "Sign here." "It's just a protective measure," Audrey said. "We'd be co-owners on the deed. Nothing changes day to day. You still live here. You still make every decision. It just means that if something happens to you, the house transfers smoothly. No probate, no delays. It protects you, Mom." I looked at the paper. I didn't pick it up. "We thought you'd want things simple," Iris added softly. "After everything with the Hendersons next door, remember how long that took for their family?" I remembered, and I noticed she'd brought it up like a prepared point, not a passing thought. I asked if I could have a few days to read it. Audrey's smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Of course," she said. "We just thought you'd want to handle it today. While Mr. Fowler's here, he drove a long way." I said I was sorry for his trouble. Mr. Fowler said it was no trouble at all. He started to explain the document. I let him talk. I nodded in the places people expect you to nod. And the whole time, I was thinking about a phone call I'd overheard 3 months earlier. Audrey had been sitting in my backyard, thinking I was still inside making lunch. Her voice carried through the screen door. She was talking to someone. Her husband, I assumed. And she said, "If we wait for her to bring it up herself, we'll be waiting forever. The house alone is worth $420,000. We just need her signature." I'd stood at the screen door with 2 plates in my hands and said nothing, just listened. Then I went back to the kitchen and set the plates down quietly and stared at the window above the sink for a long time. That was a Tuesday in July. By Thursday, I had an appointment with a woman named Patricia Hale at a law office downtown. Patricia had short gray hair and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain, and she did not waste words. I told her what I'd heard. She asked me a series of questions. Then she said, "Let's talk about a living trust." I didn't know much about living trusts. Patricia explained them the way a good teacher explains things, not talking down, just filling in what's missing. She said a living trust would place my house and my accounts inside a legal structure I controlled completely, with a named successor trustee who would step in only if I became incapacitated or died. No probate, no co-ownership, no signature required from anyone but me. She said once it was done, any attempt by someone else to claim co-ownership of the property would effectively bounce off a wall. I asked her how long it would take. She said about 3 weeks. That was in July. By August, the trust was signed, witnessed, and filed. The house was no longer just my house in the way people imagine houses to be. It was protected. And the person I named as successor trustee was not either of my daughters. His name was Owen. He was 31 years old. His mother, Dolores, had been my closest friend for 22 years until she passed from a stroke 2 winters ago. Owen had been shoveling my front walk every winter since he was a teenager. Not because I asked, but because Dolores raised him that way. After she died, he still came. He brought me soup when I had a bad flu in February. He drove me to a follow-up appointment when my eye doctor said I shouldn't drive after the dilation. He never once mentioned money, never once asked about the house. He talked about his mother when he came by, because he knew I missed her too. I named Owen, and I hadn't told a single person. So when Audrey and Iris arrived that Sunday with Mr. Fowler and his briefcase and his sign here sticker, I already knew the ground beneath their plan. I just hadn't decided yet whether to say so. I told him I'd look the document over that week. Audrey said she'd follow up on Wednesday. I said that was fine. Mr. Fowler packed his briefcase and thanked me for the coffee. When they left, I stood at the window and watched the car pull away, Audrey driving, Iris looking straight ahead, and I thought about all the years I'd spent believing their distance was just adult life. That busy meant busy. That not calling didn't mean not caring. Wednesday came. Audrey called at 11 in the morning. Have you had a chance to look it over? I said I had some questions. There was a pause. What kind of questions? I asked what would happen to the house if I wanted to sell it while both their names were on the deed. She said they'd all agree together. I asked what happened if they didn't agree. She said that wouldn't be an issue. I asked how she could be sure. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, this is a simple document. Mr. Fowler has done hundreds of these. I said I was sure he had, and that I'd be in touch. I didn't sign. By October, something shifted. Audrey's calls became less frequent, but more pointed when they did come. She started mentioning the roof. She'd heard there was some damage after the summer storms. Had I gotten it looked at? Had I talked to anyone about the gutters? She mentioned, twice, that managing a property alone at my age was a lot. The second time she said it, Iris was on the call too, which meant she'd set it up that way. I let them talk. I said I was handling everything fine. In November, a letter arrived. It was addressed to me, but the return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter explaining that Audrey had filed a petition to be appointed my legal guardian, citing concern for my cognitive capacity and my ability to manage my affairs independently. I read the letter at the kitchen table. Then I read it again. Then I set it down and looked at Frank's photograph on the counter, the one from our 20th anniversary, him laughing at something just off camera. And I said out loud to no one, well, there it is. I wasn't surprised. That's the thing people don't understand. When someone shows you who they are slowly over years, the ending doesn't shock you. It just confirms what you already suspected but hoped wasn't true. I called Patricia that afternoon. She had already seen similar filings. She was precise and calm in the way I imagine surgeons must be, not because they don't feel anything, but because feeling everything and still being steady is the job. She told me that a guardianship petition requires a court to find that I lacked the capacity to care for myself. She said the documents we put in place in August, the trust, the updated financial power of attorney, the healthcare directive, all pointed directly at a woman in full command of her affairs. She said the petition would face significant obstacles. Will it go to a hearing? I asked. Probably, she said. But they have no evidence. They have concern. Courts need more than that. I asked what I should do in the meantime. She said to keep records of everything. Write down dates and details. Don't communicate with Audrey about the legal matter without letting her know first. And if Audrey showed up at the house, I was not required to let her in. I hadn't imagined needing to do that, but I wrote it down. That December was the quietest Christmas I'd had in years, which sounds sad and maybe was, a little. But there was also something honest about it. I didn't put up a tree because I didn't feel like it, and nobody was coming to expect one. I made myself a real dinner, roast chicken, sweet potatoes, a small dish of cranberry sauce I'd made from scratch. And I ate it at my own pace without anyone asking if I thought about moving somewhere smaller, somewhere easier, somewhere that wasn't mine. Owen came by on Christmas Eve with a plate of cookies his girlfriend had made. He sat at the table and drank cocoa, and we talked about Dolores, about a trip she'd always meant to take to Portugal, about the way she used to laugh at her own jokes before she got to the punchline. When he left, he hugged me at the door and said, "Dolores would be proud of you. I hope you know that." I didn't ask him what he meant. I think I knew. The hearing was scheduled for the second week of February. Patricia and I met twice to prepare. She went through the documents, the trust paperwork, the bank statements. The letter from my doctor noting my last physical showed no signs of cognitive decline. She'd also gathered 3 character statements from my neighbor, from the principal of the school where I taught, and from Owen, who wrote 2 pages without being asked and without knowing I'd read every word. Audrey hired an attorney. I learned this through Patricia's office. The attorney was from a downtown firm with a very long name and a website that used the word zealous 3 times on the homepage. I was not frightened. I want to say that clearly, because people assume you must be frightened when your own daughter takes you to court. I was tired, and I was sad in a way that had already done its work on me over the months, a grief that had already settled and wasn't going to surprise me anymore. But I was not afraid of the courtroom. I'd waited 31 years for students to stop being afraid of getting things wrong. I knew the difference between something that was scary and something that just needed to be faced. The judge was a man in his late 50s, reading glasses perched at the edge of his nose, who moved through the docket with the efficiency of someone who had seen many people make their families into arguments. He read through the submitted materials before either attorney spoke. That was the moment I noticed Audrey's lawyer straighten in his chair, just slightly, the way people do when they realize the room isn't moving the way they expected. Patricia presented the trust documents. She presented the financial records. She presented the doctor's letter. She presented Owen's statement and the other 2. She noted the date the trust was filed, August, and pointed out that it predated the petition by 3 months, which demonstrated not a woman losing her grip on her affairs, but a woman actively and thoughtfully managing them. Audrey's attorney spoke about concern, about aging, about a mother living alone in a large house, about the natural worry of devoted daughters. The judge looked up from his papers. "Do you have documentation of any incident, medical, financial, legal, that supports the claim of incapacity?" The attorney said they had the daughter's testimony. The judge said he'd read it. There was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds and felt longer. "Petition denied," he said. "The respondent has demonstrated clear and consistent management of her affairs. There is no basis for guardianship. This matter is closed." He moved on to the next case before Audrey's lawyer had finished writing. I didn't look at Audrey as we filed out, not because I was angry. I just didn't have anything left to say in that room. Patricia touched my arm in the hallway and said, "That's done." I nodded. It was. Outside, the February air was sharp and the sun was low and bright, the way it gets in winter. That particular cold light that makes everything look clean and exact. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and thought about Frank. He would have been quiet about all of it. He wasn't a man who gloated or made speeches. He would have just squeezed my hand and said, "Let's get lunch." I took myself to lunch, a diner 2 blocks away. I ordered a turkey club and coffee and sat by the window and watched people walk by, bundled against the cold, carrying bags and briefcases and strollers, everyone in the middle of their own complicated story. I ate slowly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt like someone who had carried a very heavy thing across a very long room and was now finally allowed to set it down. Iris called me that evening, not Audrey. Iris. Her voice was smaller than usual, not in the way people get when they've been crying, but in the way people sound when they've been thinking too hard for too long. "I didn't want it to go this far," she said. I said I knew. I went along with too much, she said. I always do. I said that was true and that it wasn't something I was going to pretend wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do I do now?" I told her that was her question to answer, not mine. I told her that I loved her, which was the truth, and that love didn't mean I was going to act as though nothing had happened, which was also the truth. I told her that if she wanted to start over, a real start, not a gesture, I was willing to see what that looked like, but I wasn't going to set a pace for her rehabilitation. She'd have to find her own way back, the same way anyone has to find their own way to anything that matters. She said she understood. I said goodnight. Audrey didn't call. I hadn't expected her to. A week after the hearing, I met with Patricia again to finalize a few remaining details. I had one more thing I wanted to add to my own will, something I'd been thinking about since December. I wanted to include a letter, not legal language, just my own words, written to be opened after I'm gone, for Owen, for Iris if she'd made her way back by then, for anyone who'd shown up without being asked. I also added a clause. If anyone contested the will or the trust after my passing, they would receive nothing, not out of bitterness. Patricia asked me that directly, and I appreciated the question. No, not bitterness. Clarity. I wanted the document to mean what it said, and I'd learned by then that meaning what you say sometimes requires building a fence around it. Owen didn't know any of this. He still came by on Sundays sometimes, still checked the back gutters in spring, still texted to ask if I needed anything from the store when he was going anyway. He didn't know his name was in a trust, didn't know what I'd arranged or why. I planned to tell him in the spring, when the weather was easier and we could sit on the porch Frank built. One evening in March, just before the lights started staying longer, I was going through a box of old photographs that had been sitting in the hall closet since I moved some things around in January. I found a picture I hadn't seen in years. Dolores and me at a barbecue in her backyard? Sometime in the 90s. Both of us laughing at something neither of us could have remembered. Owen was in the background, maybe 7 years old, chasing the dog. He had the same face even then. Open, unhurried, like someone who had not yet been given a reason to close off. I put the picture on the mantel next to Frank's. It belonged there. In April, on a mild Sunday afternoon, Owen came by. I made lemonade, and we sat on the porch, and the dogwood at the corner of the yard was blooming. I told him everything, not quickly, not all at once, but steadily, the way you tell things that matter. I told him about the overheard phone call, about Patricia, about the trust, about February. He didn't interrupt. He listened the way his mother used to listen, like he had all the time in the world and nothing more important to do than be in that particular moment. When I finished, he put down his glass. "You did all that by yourself?" he said. I told him I'd had good help. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief but in something that looked like admiration, which embarrassed me a little. I wasn't used to it. Then I told him his name was in the trust. What it meant, what it didn't mean, that it wasn't a debt being repaid, wasn't charity, wasn't obligation. It was recognition. He had shown up, he had stayed, and some people, when they do that long enough, become family by every measure that actually counts. He didn't say anything for a while. The wind moved through the dogwood. A neighbor's car passed on the street. Finally, he said, "Dolores would say you were being stubborn and generous at the same time." I said that sounded about right. We finished our lemonade. He helped me carry the glasses inside without being asked. Before he left, he stopped at the door and looked at the picture on the mantel. The one of him and his mother and me, the barbecue afternoon, the dog in the summer light. "I didn't know that one existed," he said quietly. I told him it was his whenever he wanted it. He said not yet. He said he liked knowing it was here. After he left, I sat in the chair by the window, Frank's old chair, the one I'd never replaced. And I looked at the room I'd lived in for 37 years. The walls held all of it. The early years when the girls were small and everything was loud and full. The long middle years of Frank's illness, and then Frank's absence, and then the slow, strange work of learning how to be a person alone without feeling like a person diminished. And now this chapter without a tidy name. I have thought a lot in these months about what I spent so long giving away. Not money, not really. Something harder to name. The version of myself that kept quiet at the right moments to keep the peace. The one who signed things I didn't fully understand because it seemed easier than asking. The one who heard something that frightened her on a Tuesday in July and waited 2 days before doing anything about it, not out of weakness, but because part of her still hoped she was wrong. I'm not angry. I want to be clear about that because people expect anger and maybe feel cheated when it isn't there. I'm not angry at Audrey. I'm something more complicated than that. I'm sorry for the relationship we didn't build and won't build now. I'm sorry for all the years she was learning. Somewhere along the way that people are resources and love is leverage, and patience is just another word for opportunity. I don't know when she learned that. I don't know what part of it I taught her without meaning to. But I know this. I am not the woman who stood at that screen door with 2 plates in her hands and said nothing. I stopped being her sometime between that Tuesday and the following Thursday. Maybe I was always someone else underneath, and it just took a long time to find my way back to her. If you've listened this far, you might recognize something in this. Maybe you've been the one who kept making room for people who never made room for you. Maybe you've been the one who signed the thing you shouldn't have, or said yes when you knew better, or looked at people you raised and felt something cold settle in your chest that you didn't have a name for. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm 68 years old, and I barely figured out what I was supposed to do. But I'll tell you what I know now, which is that it is not too late. It is not too late to call a lawyer. It is not too late to change your documents. It is not too late to say clearly and without apology what belongs to you and what you choose to do with it. And it is not too late to look around and notice who has shown up, quietly, without drama, without expecting anything, and to decide that person matters. That's all any of us are really doing in the end. Deciding who matters. Deciding what we're willing to say out loud before we run out of time to say it. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll leave a comment. I read every one of them. And if you know someone who's been the quiet one too long, the one who gives and doesn't ask, share this with them. Let them know they're not alone in it. Because they're not even close. I've been thinking a lot lately about cause and effect. Not in any grand or philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you've lived long enough to see how they connect. What you plant eventually comes up. What you ignore eventually demands attention. What you hand away without reading eventually belongs to someone else. Audrey didn't become who she became overnight. I know that. If I'm being honest with myself, and at 68, I've run out of reasons not to be. I can trace it back. The times I didn't say no when I should have. The times I smoothed things over because conflict felt too expensive. The times I let her believe that patience was the same thing as permission. I taught her something without meaning to. I taught her that I would absorb whatever she handed me and ask nothing in return, and she learned it well. That's not blame, it's just the way things work. We shape each other, the people we live closest to, and not always in the ways we intend. Iris followed because I let the dynamic exist long enough to become the furniture of our family. Owen showed up because Dolores raised him to show up, and because I was lucky enough to be someone his mother loved. What I know now, that I didn't know clearly enough before, is that wisdom isn't something that arrives all at once. It comes in pieces, and sometimes the pieces only fit together after something forces you to sit still long enough to look at them. For me, it was a phone call I overheard on a Tuesday in July. That was the moment the pieces started moving into place. Not because it told me something I didn't know, but because it made me stop pretending I didn't know it. There's a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't make speeches. It just walks quietly to a law office on a Thursday morning and sits down and says, "I need help protecting what's mine." That was the bravest thing I did. Not the courtroom, not the letter I wrote Audrey, not any of the harder conversations. It was that first Thursday, because I did it before I had to. I did it while I still had the full power to choose. Integrity, I've come to believe, is mostly about what you do before anyone finds out. Audrey moved when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I moved when nobody was watching at all. That's the difference, not intelligence. She's smart, always has been, not resources. Just the willingness to act from the inside out, not the outside in. And then there's Owen. Owen, who never asked and never pushed and never once made me feel like a problem to be solved. Some people come into your life through bloodlines, and some come through something quieter and harder to name. Through consistency, through showing up, through being the kind of person who checks on you not because they expect anything back, but because it simply doesn't occur to them not to. He's proof that family is a thing you can build, not just inherit. If you're listening to this and you've been carrying something heavy, a relationship that takes more than it gives, a document you signed without fully reading, a silence you've kept too long because peace seemed more important than truth, I just want you to know that the moment you decide to stop is available to you. It's sitting there patient. It doesn't expire. You just have to be willing to walk toward it one Thursday at a time.